Canada's economy is falling, GDP numbers are down, and across the internet, headlines are screaming that the economy is crashing and that immigration is out of control. But how much of this is true and how much is just hype? In this video, we're going to break down the real data, the real numbers, the immigration targets, and the expert forecasts so you leave with the facts, not fear. Let's start with the claim. Recently, a video went viral with the headline, "Canada's economy is crashing and immigration is out of control." In that video, the speaker pointed to statistics. Canada's GDP report for May 2025. The report showed a decline in GDP for the second consecutive month. But let's slow down. A decline of 0.1% is not the same as a collapse. The word crash suggests a sudden, deep, uncontrolled collapse, like what we see in financial crises. So, let's investigate carefully. Is Canada crashing or is it just slowing? Let's talk about the GDP numbers. In May 2025, Canada's economy shrank by 0.1%. That's 2 months in a row. At first glance, that looks concerning, but economists usually look for longer patterns before declaring a recession or crash. 2 months of decline is not enough evidence. Now let's break this down by sector. Goods-producing industries fell, especially mining, quarrying, and oil and gas extraction. These industries are sensitive to global commodity prices. When demand falls, production slows. Retail trade also declined by about 1.2%, showing that consumers are spending less. Inflation and higher interest rates are squeezing household budgets. Manufacturing, on the other hand, expanded. Real estate, rental and leasing, and transportation and warehousing also showed growth. So some sectors fell, others grew. This looks more like a mixed slowdown, not a full-scale collapse. Remember, a crash means multiple large sectors falling together fast and deep. That is not what the data shows. Let's talk about why it happened. The big question is, why did GDP dip in May? Economists point to 3 key reasons. First, global energy markets. Oil and gas prices have been unstable in 2025, and Canada relies heavily on energy exports. When global demand drops, Canada's oil and gas sector takes a hit. Second, consumer spending. With inflation still high and interest rates elevated, Canadian families are tightening their wallets. People are buying fewer goods in retail stores. That affects the retail trade sector. Third, global trade uncertainty. Tensions with the United States over tariffs and trade agreements have created instability. Canada's exports are facing pressure, which drags the economy. When you put these together, you see that this slowdown is not unique to Canada. It's part of a global pattern. The United States, Europe, and even parts of Asia are experiencing similar pressures. Now let's talk immigration, because this is where emotions run high. Critics argue that immigration is out of control and is the main cause of Canada's economic slowdown. But the numbers tell a different story. In 2025, Canada's target for permanent resident admissions is around 395,000 people. That is actually lower than 2024, when the number was above 430,000. And the government has announced that in 2026 and 2027, the caps will shrink even further. So immigration is not unlimited. It is being reduced. Yes, immigration levels are high compared to Canada's history. And yes, rapid population growth puts pressure on housing, healthcare, and infrastructure. But blaming immigration alone ignores the bigger picture. The real problem is not immigration itself, but Canada's slow response in building enough homes, expanding hospitals, and improving transportation networks to keep up with population growth. That's why you see frustration on the ground. But saying immigration is out of control is not accurate when the government is already lowering the caps. Now we move on to housing and services pressure. Where immigration really connects to the economy is housing and services. Housing costs are at the center of Canadian frustration. In 2025, rental prices in Toronto and Vancouver climbed by double digits again. In smaller cities too, demand is outpacing supply. Families struggle to find affordable apartments, and young people cannot buy their first homes. Healthcare is another pressure point. Hospitals are crowded. Wait times for family doctors and specialists are getting longer. When newcomers arrive, they join the line for these same services. That adds to the public perception that immigration is overwhelming the system. But again, the real issue is supply. Canada has not built enough homes, clinics, or transit systems to match population growth. Immigration makes the shortage visible. But the shortage itself is a policy failure that has been building for decades. Next is expert forecasts. Now let's listen to what the experts say. Reuters reported that while GDP shrank in May, early data for June suggested some rebound. That means Canada may avoid a full quarterly contraction. The OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, forecasts Canada's economy will grow by about 1.5 to 2% in 2025. That is modest growth, not collapse. The Bank of Canada expects inflation to slowly ease toward its 2% target. If that happens, interest rates may eventually come down, giving consumers and businesses more breathing room. So, expert consensus is clear. Canada faces a slowdown, but not a crash. The economy is bending, not breaking. Another big question is, why then do we keep hearing the word crash? Because politics thrives on strong language. Immigration is one of the most emotional topics in Canada today. Opposition politicians frame it as the root of every problem. High rents, high grocery prices, hospital wait times, and media outlets know that dramatic words like crash or out of control grab attention, clicks, and views. But the data tells us a different story. Structural issues like housing supply, energy dependence, and global trade tensions are far more influential than immigration caps. It is easier, however, to blame newcomers than to admit that Canada has underinvested in infrastructure for decades. This is why separating facts from politics is so important. So what does all this mean for ordinary people? If you're a Canadian worker, you will likely continue to face high rents and high grocery bills. Wages are not growing as fast as the cost of living, and that will remain a challenge. Job growth is slowing in some industries, especially retail and resource extraction. If you're an immigrant, student, or temporary worker, you should know that pathways remain open. Canada still needs skilled workers, healthcare professionals, and students in key fields. But you will face tougher competition for housing and for jobs in major cities. For families, the debate over immigration will continue to shape politics. Expect more announcements from the government on reducing immigration levels and expanding housing supply. But these solutions will take time to deliver results. So let's answer the big question simply. Is Canada's economy crashing? No, it is slowing down, but it is still stable. Is immigration out of control? No, immigration levels are high, but they are capped, and those caps are being lowered. The real challenge is management, building enough homes, funding enough hospitals, and ensuring that growth is balanced. So next time you hear that Canada is collapsing, look at the actual numbers. The situation is serious, but it is not the disaster some headlines want you to believe. Thank you for watching. If you want verified updates without the hype, subscribe now and join me for more fact-based discussions on Canada's economy and immigration.